Hello there.
Welcome back to, we haven't quite decided if this is going to be just a regular episode or a segment of an episode, but we're back on In a Galaxy. We're talking about Ahsoka's trial, specifically in Season 5. Welcome back to Star Wars in a Galaxy, watching all the Star Wars we can get our hands on. I'm Eli.
I'm Jacob.
And we have a very special guest. This arc gets into a lot of dealings with the law and how Ahsoka and other characters may obey or, in some cases, disobey the law. And we decided to bring in a real-world expert on this. We have brought in real-world lawyer and also massive Star Wars fan, Thomas Harper. How are you? Also, Star Wars movie trivia Schmoedown champion of the world, I might say, Thomas Harper. How are you doing, Thomas?
I'm good. Expert is a strong term to describe me. Dabbling fan would be better, and then the champion thing still doesn't sound quite real. So, but thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, thanks for coming. So we got a bunch of legal aspects of this to ask to Thomas, but before we do, I did want to we often like to get a little background of our guests before they come on our show. So how did you get into Star Wars? What were your first experiences with the saga?
Oh man, so I grew up primarily in the 90s, so it was like dead space for Star Wars. Like it is so weird to live in this time now where it's hard to just keep up with all the content that's coming out. But when I first got into it, I was 6 or 7. My dad showed me like a bootlegged VHS tape that he had recorded off of, let's see, this was A New Hope, and A New Hope was only shown on Fox. So it was like Fox, like just the normal Fox station. So there's commercials and everything. I thought that was just part of the movie. And I just sat down in front of the VHS and just was completely enthralled. Our tiny little, and didn't have flat screens at the time, but like our tiny little tube TV, probably like no bigger than 20 inches, something that you wouldn't even see in like a dentist office these days, so small. And I was just absolutely sucked in from the moment the Star Destroyer and the Tana V4 come across the screen. When Vader steps aboard the ship for the first time, I was locked in and hooked immediately. And the tough thing was that I was too young for some of the actual new content that was coming out then was just novels. I mean, you had the Zahn novels. That was really about it. They relaunched the toy series in 95, and that like turbocharged me. But nobody had any idea that Lucas was thinking about the prequels and stuff. So my whole world existed in those 3 movies on VHS tapes for, a few years, and then the toys, and then the special editions came out in 97 when I was 12. And that was like pouring kerosene all over the fire. So it just happened to hit at the right time. My dad was an art teacher, a high school art teacher for my entire life. And so he had a small little, one of our rooms in the house was just a small art studio. So it was just like toys all over the place. He had like ships hanging and stuff. And I would just sit in there and like, he had comics and, you name it, he had it in there. And I would just kind of sit in there as he worked and consume this stuff, like old Al Williamson Star Wars comics and stuff. And yeah, it was like fishing with dynamite in a way for the Star Wars franchise for somebody like me. But yeah, so it was a fun ride, and then the prequels hit at a perfect time too.
Yeah, such a different time from the modern day experience for a Star Wars fan. I mean, being the age that I am, and I think Eli, you probably have a similar experience. I just was barely kind of in 4th, 5th grade. I was just barely kind of becoming really aware of the extent of Star Wars and how much there was. I just had that awareness right before the Disney acquisition, and then
Wow.
Boom, obviously everything changed, and now it's just a deluge.
Can we switch places and you just like you be me and you could take care of all my responsibilities and I get to experience Star Wars from your perspective? Because that's awesome. I would kill to be in that position.
It's crazy to me.
I cannot keep up these days.
It's so crazy to me that there was a time, not really that long ago, when we were talking about, when's the next Star Wars thing going to be coming out? And then there was a point, I think it was 2 years ago, where we were like, when Solo was releasing 6 months from The Last Jedi, when we were like, is this too much Star Wars for the market to handle?
Right.
And I'm like,
what a charmed life we all live.
and I'm like, wait, what? How did we get here?
Disney's messing it up.
Like 4 years ago, we didn't have anything, and now we're getting too much of it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I distinctly remember. My first celebration was Celebration 5 in 2010, and so you had the Clone Wars coming out, so you did have a panel that was the sneak peek at the season premiere of the Clone Wars. The biggest thing that was season 3, I think. Yeah, season 3. They revealed the clip from the episode where Delta Squad very briefly escorts back the dead bodies of Nox and Halsey, the Jedi that get killed by Savage Opress, and it just like the roof blew off. You would think that a new Star Wars movie had been released, because at that point in time they had only existed in the Republic Commando video game and novel. But other than that, the only new thing that was like big in the Star Wars universe was Lucas did a panel himself, or he was the key figure. They had the upcoming Blu-ray release for the first time ever. They were bringing it out, and they were putting deleted scenes that had never been released before to the public. And so they aired the deleted scene where in Return of the Jedi, you're supposed to see Luke completing his lightsaber and igniting it for the first time in the cave. So they played that, and it was as if, again, they were showing a trailer for a brand new Star Wars movie. That was it. The rest of the con was just like reflections on old content, just different like deep dives into stuff. And I remember thinking like, man, this is as good as it gets. This is awesome. I can't wait till August when the Clone Wars starts up again. It'll be good to have that back in my life. And then, little did I know, I was actually in Afghanistan when they announced, I was deployed in the Army, and they announced the Disney release. And like we're in the middle of a war, and like all anybody wanted to talk to me about was like not my legal opinion on anything, but like my opinion on the Disney takeover. And I was like, how the heck should I know what they're going to do with it? I don't know. They'll get their investment back. I suppose that's an answer. But yeah, so
they sure did.
3 sequel trilogy movies later, just judging on box office, did they get their investment back? I wonder. It's crazy to me to think about, like, and I was just thinking about the other day, I'm like, when's Book of Boba coming out? That's December. When's our last Star Wars thing? That was October with Visions. How am I going to wait this long? And I'm like, Eli, you waited a year and a half from Solo to Rise of Skywalker with nothing else in there. I mean, actually, there was other stuff in there. I'm trying to remember exactly, but I'm like, yeah, I don't know how I did that. But now I'm just imagining, like, oh, a new season of the Clone Wars coming out, and we're seeing the Republic Commandos come back, and we're gonna see rip-off, like, drugstore Darth Maul. I think that's a term Jacob coined, not drugstore Darth Maul. I did that here, but rip-off Darth Maul is definitely what Jacob called Savage Opress on a recent episode of ours.
That's accurate. That's accurate.
And we were like, oh my god, this is Star Wars at its peak. Yeah, I want to extend, and you've gotten into this a little bit, but how do you, of course, we know you from the Leo Weeks, the Joint Geeks, all of the stuff you do, analyzing Star Wars from a military and a law perspective. How do you get into that? How do you get into that stuff? Oh, also,
that's a great question.
Sorry.
No,
how do you also get into, I know you were at least until this year, a big participant in the Dragon Con trivia contests, and also in the movie Trivia Schmoedown, where you're now the Star Wars champion. How do you get into all the trivia stuff as well?
I hit my head really badly and got a brain injury and can't make good decisions. No, I'm just kidding. That probably would explain it. It's probably diagnosable. I feel like most Star Wars fans, like most Star Wars mega fans, could probably go to a doctor and get diagnosed with something to explain all of it. But no, the podcasting stuff is funny because So it kind of tracks along with my career on active duty in the Army. I have been a military attorney for about 10 years now, and I was on active duty. And one of my favorite jobs on active duty was what I do 9 to 5 now for the Red Cross, which is involved in basically the law of armed conflict, the law of warfare, and so the laws that govern war, basically. And I practiced that. That's what I did in Afghanistan. I advised on combat operations. And then when I got back, I switched jobs when I got back to the States was doing something different, but I still taught that. So I knew commanders. I would go in and teach young soldiers these rules, get them ready to deploy and make good decisions, the whole 9 yards. I always had that as a part of my life. And then we moved bases. I lost all those connections. I didn't know anybody at the new base. And so I was really missing teaching this stuff. And it had nothing. I wasn't really bringing Star Wars into the picture, but I'm like at work one day, and a buddy of mine who is out in California texted me, and he was like, "Hey, I just got done with this like convention out there. Have you heard of the Legal Geeks? Like, I went to one of their panels, and they were analyzing like legal issues in Batman. It seems like it's right up your alley." I was like, "I have not," and so I fell down the rabbit hole. Was like reading all their blog posts, and I think it was the Josh Gilliland, one of the co-founders, had written about the legal ownership of the Millennium Falcon, like tracing it all the way down the line to at that point to the Force Awakens. And I was like, how can I get involved in this? So I wrote a full pitch, like a full treatment for an article on a podcast and like an episode, and sent it to him about the Death Star. And he was like, I was expecting like a back and forth and stuff, and I just get like a quick email like, "Hey man, this sounds awesome. Like, you're a Star Wars fan. Like, here's my number. Call me and like we'll talk." And Josh has been one of my closest friends ever since. That was like 2016, so it's been a minute.
Wow.
And yeah, I just kind of nested in and became their, Josh knows a ton about Star Wars, but he's got to cover a ton of other stuff too, Marvel and create content across the board there. But I was able to fill a nice little gap there and be like the Star Wars guy. So if all else fails, Thomas can take care of covering it. And then the other other stuff just kind of branched out from there. Like, I'm sure you guys had the same experience with the show. You meet people, like you make connections. You guest on some other show, or you get connected, and it just kind of, you build your own little spiderweb network. And that's how the Joint Geeks got started. I presented for the Naval Academy on a Star Wars and Law issue, and a few of us got together and were like, "This is fun. Why do we only do this once a year or twice a year? Why don't we start a podcast? Like, that can't be that much work, can it?" And then here we are. So it's like, I feel like it's the story of every podcast or whatever. Like, your eyes and your intent are like way bigger than what the job actually is, and so you bite off way more than you can chew, and like here we all are.
Yeah, definitely.
So, a little story. I scheduled 4 guest episodes 4 weeks in a row last November, and I think both Jacob and I hated me for the next month and a half. So, I totally understand how that is biting off a little more than you can chew.
This will be great. Wait, what did I do?
Yeah.
Yeah. The trivia stuff was like, I had gone to Dragon Con for the first time in 2009 and I had only been to like very, very small, like 1-day type comic shows in North Carolina, where I'm from, like tiny, like in a hotel conference room, like tiny. And that was fun, but it's not Dragon Con. Dragon Con's like Celebration size. It's like 80,000 people packed into downtown Atlanta. Like, it's the best show other than Celebration that's out there. But I got thrown into that. A buddy of mine in law school invited me, and I went and just like had a blast. It flew by, and I was immediately hooked. Because I joined the Army kind of shortly afterward, I had a gap, and so I went back in 2013 after I got back from Afghanistan. And I saw they had rebooted. They had a Star Wars trivia contest originally, but it was like bar trivia, kind of not really that serious. Just kind of high fives as for the winner or whatever. But at some point in that gap, it got rebooted by the guy that currently runs it, and it got really, really hard. And I remember I was with, at the time, she was my girlfriend, not my wife, but we're there, and I was like, I'm going to go take this qualifier. How hard could it be? Like, I know a lot about Star Wars. Come on. We took it. At the time, it was all EU material included in it because the reboot had not happened. And I think I got like 11 right. And I walked out of there like bruised, battered. My pride. I was like, we went and got a drink. I was like, do I not know Star Wars? Like, I've read books and I've watched the movies, but this quiz would say that I don't know anything. And so I was like, I kind of put it out of my mind. I was like, there's no way I'm going to go back and like read all those books and do the work necessary. But when the reset happened and they announced that they were just going to limit the trivia to just canon, I said, sort of like Alex, maybe this is my opportunity. And so I dove in 2015 and got second place. I like missed on like completing part of the Jedi Code. I remember all my losing misses. They're just permanently stuck in my brain. And then the next 2 years, I was lucky enough to win back to back. But it's just been fun. It's a small sort of family that plays. I mean, like, you've got to be insane to play Star Wars trivia in any context, but especially there, because it's just, if you've taken the online quiz that they've released publicly the last 2 years, or you've seen it in person, it's something else. The Schmoedown has gotten to that level on some of the questions that they ask, but I mean, in 2020, just for example, we had an entire round of questions on the Thrawn book that had released a week prior. And I remember telling my wife, we were on vacation that week, and I remember telling her on Monday, I was like, I have to find this book. Like, he's going to ask questions. She was like, he's not that cruel. He's not going to ask questions. That's crazy. The book releases tomorrow. I was like, I know, but Alex gets an advance copy. Several people that compete get advance copies because they write reviews. I'm not in that boat. I'm going to be, and she was like, you're crazy. And I searched around all these, like, we're the tiny beach in Delaware. And they're like, of course, everybody's like, a Star Wars book. No, we don't have that. Please leave. And so of course there's a round in it, and I was just like, you could probably see on my face, like, of course I predicted this. But the Schmoedown just is an offshot of that, but it's been fun. A lot of work, but a lot of fun so far.
Absolutely. Should we just delve into the legal stuff now? Got anything else to say before? Okay. Our first question. So we're talking about Ahsoka Tano's trial in front of both the Jedi Council and later on the Republic Senate. So Ahsoka's trial, specifically talking about the one in the Republic, has different rules in the Galactic Republic because, of course, they have a different code of law than the United States. How do you think Ahsoka's trial might play out under U.S. law?
So, I don't think that the writers intended this, but there's actually a pretty strong parallel to what might happen to a military member if they were accused of significant misconduct that also violated just federal law. So it's best to think of Ahsoka because she actually is a military officer. She holds the rank of commander. She holds a spot in the Grand Army of the Republic. So she's a GAR officer, presumably with a commission under the Republic, right? The Jedi Council happens to hold rank, but they hold formal positions within that army. So think of it like you would any military officer. And because of that, that's why you see, so her membership in the Jedi is sort of like this specialized, cloak that's around her. Just like a normal military member, if they commit misconduct or they're accused of it, they're going to first face judgment or justice on the military side. Usually what happens, so if Ahsoka were a real life officer and she was accused of this sort of thing, the military is going to do the first investigation, potentially in tandem with civilian authorities. So that's where you see like Tandivo and the other, I guess it's just an army of droids that investigates alongside Inspector. Inspector Devo needs his own standalone movie, by the way. But
maybe that's why he's so cranky. Is because he just works with droids all the time. He doesn't actually have anyone who cares the same amount.
Yeah, that's another rant for another time. But so they capture that right. So there's this investigation that's happening by the Republic, and the Jedi are trying to get to the bottom of it as well. And the Jedi get the first crack because she's a Jedi member, and just like in the real world, say a federal prosecutor, the U.S. Attorney's office in that area, the where the military base is, they're going to be interested in taking action. I mean, this is like a terrorist act, like a major one. Jedi are dead, clone troopers are dead, like big time case. So they're going to want to do it, but they're going to let the military kind of lead the way. And at the end of the day, like the cynical side of it is a federal prosecutor's office is more than happy to let the military do the work and spend the resources and the time to prosecute. Occasionally you'll have instances where they make a push and they want to take the case. So the Republic definitely had an interest here, but you saw the Jedi take the lead here. And what happened was interesting because she didn't get court-martialed by the Jedi Order, right? There was that last minute sort of plea and whatnot, and so, but Anakin makes that sort of defiant stand that was ultimately fruitless, and she gets kicked out. And that actually could happen in the real world. So you can get in trouble. You can be put on trial as a soldier. That's called a court-martial. That's just lots of people have an idea of what that might look like. It is just a criminal trial with a military judge, so a lawyer that wears the robe up on the bench. And then instead of a jury just made up of people like you and me over the age of 18, the jury is made up of senior military officers and enlisted personnel. So
it's just a criminal trial completely within the military?
Correct. So that there are rules about what evidence can come in. It is all self-contained. If you get convicted at a court-martial, they are federal offenses, so it's a federal trial. It goes on your criminal record just like anything else. But you're going to go to a military prison. So in the Army, that would be Fort Leavenworth, and the United States disciplinary barracks are one of a handful of naval brigs that are scattered around the United States. And so the Jedi, to start with, had the option, because presumably they have their own code of justice, right? They had the option to prosecute her, do whatever they wanted to her to account for this conduct. For whatever reason, they decided, and probably something to do with Anakin's plea, and I think there were some significant issues with Ahsoka's treatment. They kick her out. So they kick her out and they toss her right over to the Republic to be handled. That can and does happen all the time. So the military can administratively kick you out, say, we're not going to prosecute you. The civilians will. We'll let them handle that. But you're not going to be in uniform anymore. So that's where they strip her of all titles related to her service in the GAR. They strip her of her Padawan status, and she's gone. There's that great scene with all the Jedi around the circle and Mace Windu being a real jerk, and she's just down sitting in judgment. And that happens routinely in the military. Oftentimes with crimes like these, there'll be a conversation, and sometimes the military, for whatever reason, is going to hand off the case to the civilian authorities and say, look, we'll kick them out. They're not going to be in uniform drawing a paycheck and getting benefits. You guys handle it. Usually you see that. When I was on active duty in Georgia, we had just a terrible case where a couple soldiers murdered a couple people, a couple of fellow soldiers. The military could have handled that, and one of the cases they did, but the balance of the cases were handled by state prosecutors in Georgia and South Carolina. And so that what you see with Ahsoka is the Jedi making that decision, the council really making the decision to let the Republic handle it and kick her over. And in many cases for a soldier, that's probably going to be worse, a worse fate, because you're potentially exposed to a jury that doesn't understand anything. She's going to be tried by and judged by people that don't know what it is to be a Jedi or anything. They don't know any of the people involved. If I don't know what the Jedi jury looked like, but if somebody like Kenobi is allowed to sit in judgment of her, there's some history there, right? That's probably pretty favorable for Ahsoka, but she loses all that, and she has to get prosecuted by Tarkin of all people.
Yeah,
Yes.
That's tough.
I actually had to Google because I was rewatching the episode today just for a little bit more clarity about exactly what happens, because it's been a little while. But I was like, why does Tarkin get to prosecute Ahsoka? And I looked it up, and they were like, oh, because Palpatine said so. I'm like, oh, not that guy again.
I mean, when I was rewatching this in preparation for this, it was pretty clear that Palpatine had a very good idea of how he wanted the trial to turn out. Because clearly at this point he's realizing that the way he can get Anakin to turn to the dark side is by removing all the people from around him. Remove Ahsoka, separate him from the Jedi, separate him from Obi-Wan, try and put Padme in danger.
Yeah.
So yeah, taking a bit of a step back, if we're ready to move on to the next question.
Go right ahead.
In the beginning, the Jedi Council have Ahsoka and Anakin serve as investigators. Now, in the real world, assuming that the Jedi are kind of equivalent to a military organization, let's say, because it seems like that is pretty much at this point what they are, at least in conjunction with the GAR. Is that something that would happen where people within the same organization would be investigating, or would there be a special group or an outside group involved if something like that were to happen in the U.S. military?
The Jedi play such weird roles. It's like one day Ahsoka is commanding troops on the battlefield, and then the next day she's wearing an investigator's hat. This is like the genius of Palpatine, because it's like he knew their system and how they were just fundamentally ill-equipped to deal with anything concerning a war, and also like balancing all the craziness that happens with it. And so you see that here, because Ahsoka in the real world, right? They're investigating this bombing to a certain extent. They have been witness to it. Perhaps you would have a military unit that's running down a target or a lead on on an attack. So if this happened in a war zone, maybe you have a military unit that's going after some intelligence on the battlefield, something like that. But so I guess theoretically, the start of it with them going after and looking for Jakar Bomani, or just like looking into his past. I think he was the technician that got blown up, and then his wife, Letta Turman, I think is her name.
Yeah.
I did not watch the episode to prep, so this is like stuff rattling around in my head. It's like where the sickness part comes in. The start of it, I could see that kind of happening in some vein, but the moment that they kind of stumbled upon a larger plot, right? The moment that they locate Letta and realize that there's something more afoot, that's the point at which the two of them should have called in authorities and really brought in extra help. And to a certain extent, they did. They bring in Letta. They after a certain point, they get her into a Republic facility. But in the real world, each branch of service has their own investigative body. So you've probably heard of NCIS, right? The Naval Criminal Intelligence Service, I think. That's a mix of naval personnel, so uniformed personnel, and then what you see in the TV show, which is mostly civilians who work for it. The Army is the Criminal Investigative Division, CID for short. That's an equal mix. A lot of more experienced soldiers that make the switch. They were doing some other job, and they get trained up as they're pseudo FBI agents to an extent. But those investigative bodies are the ones that are tapped, whether here in the U.S. or out on a battlefield. They go out and they investigate crimes. So great example from the real world. I was involved in an investigation in Afghanistan about use of force incident on a Navy SEAL team in central Afghanistan, and I traveled out and patrolled out with a SEAL team alongside a criminal investigator. So we're out at this small village compound where the crime happened, and you've got Navy SEALs pulling security. They're like. They probably think they're Jedi Knights. I know some SEALs, so that I have no problem saying that. That's not a knock on Navy SEAls. That's you got to have confidence in life sometimes. And then it's like me and the investigator going around and looking at this stuff. So in reality, what should have happened is an immediate call to Republic investigators or whatnot get in there, because at the end of the day, they're in a crime scene. Like they kind of realize that and put that together, but it's threatening the integrity of the case. They're trying to figure out who bombed the Jedi Temple, but in being in that house, in interrogating the witness, in touching things, they are potentially contaminating the crime scene. And by that, I mean tainting evidence that either might not be usable anymore or at some point might not be admissible in court, which could all impact justice being done. So Anakin that's like typical Anakin, right? Like, this is my mission. I'm not going to worry about anything else. Like this is all I'm focused on, and I don't care about any consequences. And Ahsoka sort of goes along with it, and then it all gets upturned there in the prison facility.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. At a certain point, the Jedi they kind of just become like bulls in a china shop. And you could argue that they kind of have some good reasons that they are wary of having the Republic, the military courts or whatever get involved. As we've seen in the Clone Wars, how there's some malice there. But they definitely, yeah, this is definitely an example of a time when they definitely could have brought in some outside expertise. I think.
Yeah.
Okay, Jacob, you can go on your Jedi Lost Their Way bender anytime you want.
Guilty as charged.
No, that you just described the entire war effort, right? Like it didn't it wasn't some master plan by Palpatine as much as like, I know the Jedi and I know how like short-sighted they are. Here, throw them a bone and watch them chase it.
Yeah, he's able to just, the Jedi want to do it all, and Palpatine's able to just push and pull and smush and squeeze the Jedi in all sorts of ways, and he just kind of makes them. He just kind of makes the Jedi tie themselves into knots in the end, and that.
Yeah.
I think that ends up being their undoing. Is that they don't really mission creep, I guess, in a sense. They just don't really. They don't have any boundaries. Then they want to do everything.
Yeah,
and so they end up.
And they don't want anybody questioning it either, because there's that great quote in Revenge of the Sith where Obi-Wan and Anakin are going back and forth about Anakin's assignment, or just they eventually get to Anakin's assignment to spy on Palpatine, and Obi-Wan tells him, the Council does not like it when Palpatine interferes in Jedi affairs and Jedi business. That describes to a T one of their biggest problems, that just sets the galaxy up to completely believe that they pulled off this massive rebellion almost. And you see that here, rather than the Jedi Temple has been attacked, 2 Jedi have been killed. This is personal. And so rather than treat this like any other crime that would have occurred on Coruscant, they really dive in, and it just sucks 2 of their finest members in, and it very nearly tears the Order, a serious tear in its fundamental fabric.
Yeah, it's a massive moment in the Clone Wars. Absolutely no denying that. It's crazy watching it again to see how it's so much of a thrill ride. That arc is so much of a thrill ride.
No, we may have touched on this a bit earlier, but I guess we see Tarkin seeking the death penalty for Ahsoka once she's barred from the Order, once she's kind of kicked out into a regular criminal trial with the Republic. For a similar situation with someone in the U.S. military, is that a possibility, or what are the legal repercussions like for something of that magnitude?
Yeah, I think it'd absolutely be on the table. We call those capital trials. Capital punishment being the death penalty. They are rare in the military. Crime obviously happens in uniform, but compared to the civilian side, you don't see major crimes as much. Like the rate of murder within the military is exceptionally low. I mean, that's why those cases tend to make news when they happen. But capital trials can and do happen. I don't think the military hasn't executed anyone since the 50s, something like that. So there's not like a stock full military death row or anything like that at Leavenworth. Nothing like that. But it is an option, and for an attack like this, perpetrated by a Jedi that killed multiple people. I mean, premeditated murder is as bad as it gets under either the military or the civilian law. This is one where you go back to the potential handoff in the case. The Jedi would take a look and say, are we capable with what we have going on right now to do this trial justice, to take this as a capital trial? Is it something that where the civilians, so the Republic, are they more likely to get a conviction than we are because of how our trials would run? Do they have more resources than we do? And so it doesn't surprise me at all that Tarkin goes after the death penalty. I think that would be the starting point for any civilian trial as well, and they'd use that as a negotiating tactic. As a military prosecutor, I all the time leaned on that maximum possible sentence. I didn't personally prosecute a death penalty case, but when you're sitting in those boots facing, and I tell you, look, I read out in court, maximum possible punishment is 35 years confinement, reduction to E1, dishonorable discharge. That starts to sit very, very heavy on you. You start to do that math when you're sitting in the defendant's seat and say, okay, I'm going to be in my 60s or whatever by the time I get out of here. And that could be a powerful tool to drive a confession, to drive a plea bargain, a guilty plea, what have you. And so, there's a world in which that's exactly what Tarkin was doing. Let's bring the complete hammer down. They also have to set this is unprecedented, right? Other than, you have some isolated examples of Jedi going bonkers and murdering people. Pong Krell comes to mind, but this is unlike anything that they've seen. So they're going to bring the hammer down as hard as they can to send a message, not just to the Jedi Order and other Jedi, but to the Republic as well.
Okay, that's interesting. And a quick follow-up before, Eli, I know you have another question, I think. To that, then, we see Tarkin kind of maybe, again, as that negotiating tactic to try and bring the hammer down, suggests that there's separatist involvement and that Ahsoka was in league. Obviously, it points out that she was working with Asajj Ventress. Maybe she's in league with the separatists. If something like this has happened, and I don't know exactly what the closest real world things in the U.S. military that have happened like this, if something like this were to happen, some serious sedition, treason with an armed forces member, would that be something that would be looked into? Like, is this an instance of a foreign adversary being involved, or would that most likely, do you think, be just someone going off the rails for some other reason?
Yeah, it absolutely would be looked at, and there's the possibility that Tarkin is making those statements with the idea that Asajj Ventress, if that's who he believes, and that's probably the answer, right? If he believes, and I think they had footage that and confirmed that was that the two of them were allegedly working together. So that's exactly where they were targeting. They could view Asajj as the bigger fish, to say that's who we want to prosecute. We're not going to let you off the hook, but if you turn state's evidence, if you come on board and as part of your plea agree to provide testimony, agree to aid investigators and bring her to justice, we want to get her very badly. And so maybe all we do is take the death penalty off the table. Maybe that's the deal. Or maybe we agree to, a sentence cap where you'll be eligible for parole, that meaning an early release if it's deemed appropriate, as opposed to life without parole where you're just stuck. So that kind of scenario happens all the time, not just in in the context of like a sedition or a terrorist type case. You have seen that actively in terrorist cases across the board, where the person that we have has information. They're maybe not the highest link on the food chain, but maybe we can use them, still prosecute them, still bring them to justice, but use them to get at somebody higher. That's a classic tactic.
So it would no longer primary about the person who's actually on trial at that point. Potentially, maybe that's what Tarkin's thinking is, how do we follow the trail and see where it leads?
Yeah, I mean, it's look, you have a right to a trial. You have a presumption of innocence, Ahsoka.
Yeah.
Fine, if you want to stay cloaked in that and go to trial, we'll do that, and I will convict you, or I will get you convicted. I will prosecute this aggressively, and I will go after the death penalty, and I will not pull any stops in that. Or you can help us. You can face justice and maybe a lighter version of it, and in doing so, maybe you can redeem yourself a little bit and help the Republic and the Jedi Order by bringing this massive fugitive, whose biggest crime ever was helping kidnap Rada the Huttlet, bigger than anything else she did, but bring her to justice in the process. So, yeah, that's the not so subtle hint, hint, wink, wink, nod, nod that he does. I was a bit of a hammer as a prosecutor, and I routinely use that tactic. So yeah, not on any Jedi though.
All right. So Eli, I think you have another
absolutely.
question.
So I was rewatching it earlier today, and I happened to come upon Tarkin. Now, Tarkin seems to me absolutely not having much knowledge at all of the military trial process, to be a bit hawkish on Ahsoka. He seems to go a little bit too far in some of his prosecution. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. They don't seem to have really any rules about the trial. This is where I don't know if like Filoni wrote the episode or like Gilroy, one of the frequent writers, but this is where they were just like, I've seen a couple legal movies. Let me just like bang something out. Like this is what Tarkin would say. This is where it goes a little off the rails. You've got Padme defending, right? She's extremely intelligent, but not a lawyer. There are lawyers in the Star Wars universe that exists. They don't have anybody in this trial though. And then you've got Tarkin, who doesn't have legal training, but he once like hacked into some pirates' hyperdrive and sent them into a sun. So you've got kind of a classic prosecutor mold. But in the real world, even in, I think you see a little bit of it in Star Wars. There are rules in play, right? There are rules in play for a reason, primarily and most importantly to ensure a fair trial, because we would rather, like, our system is built that we would rather somebody that is guilty walk free because the case wasn't prosecuted or investigated right than we would somebody that corners get cut and an innocent person sit in jail. And the system is far from perfect in the real world as it is in Star Wars, but you see the real issues with those guardrails not being on. Like Ahsoka gets railroaded. I mean, there is no, and that's intentionally the way they wrote this, and that's why Palpatine chose Tarkin for the job, because he might as well have had a little conductor hat and a train whistle, like, choo choo, all aboard the train to the Republic prison and the death penalties. So that was all intentional, but yeah, it's as an attorney, somebody who's tried cases, it's distressing to see Ahsoka in this. And I'm a criminal defense attorney now, so my skin really crawls to see somebody get treated like that.
And there's that line I was looking at, specifically I was thinking of, where Tarkin goes, "And where is your master now?" And Ahsoka says something like, "He's out looking for the real killer." And then Tarkin says, "Well, maybe he should be looking for you." I'm like, he can't say that, can he? He can't say that.
Yeah, well, the other thing is that one of the most fundamental protections in our system is the ability to stay silent, to not be compelled to give testimony and potentially incriminate yourself. So if Ahsoka wants to testify on her own behalf, if she wants to speak to the court and to Tarkin, that's totally up to her, but she doesn't have to. Like a defendant in the military or in the civilian system, you don't have to put on a lick of evidence. You can let the prosecution go, present their case. You can immediately rest. So no witnesses, no evidence in trial. And you can still, unless they have met their burden, proving you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, the jury must find you not guilty. Doesn't mean you're innocent, right? Doesn't mean you didn't do it. But that burden is very high for a reason. And the law doesn't force you to give them an assist, because you see the danger. I mean, I should play this for some of my clients when they think about talking, because I'm a criminal defense attorney in the Army Reserve still, and you see the danger in speaking in this episode, because the moment that you want to offer any testimony, well, Tarkin gets his shot at you too. You get to cross-examine. That's a thing. And that's a massive, massive risk, because you don't know what questions they're going to offer. And cross-examination is, it makes for good TV and good movies, because that's the prosecutor in this case telling you what the answer is, right? It's not, well, where were you on this day? It's me saying, hey, at 3:00, you were in your car, weren't you? And that car was on Main Street. And on Main Street, you were right in front of the Burger King. And that's the exact time at 3:50 where we have you pinned by GPS that Burger King got robbed, isn't it? You just lead them down the path. You're confirming the testimony that I'm giving. And so Tarkin is very good at needling her and sort of putting on the show that a prosecutor needs to do. But, he's got the gloves are off, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I mean, this definitely seems like a situation in which the right to remain silent probably would not be respected, and if Ahsoka chose to remain silent, a lot of people, it seems like from what we saw in this episode, would definitely be just like, oh well, then she's guilty,
Yeah.
if she's
It would
not
have
even
implied her
trying to
guilt.
defend herself.
Yeah.
Let's say that Ahsoka chose to stay with the Jedi Order following her acquittal. Now, outside of her being exonerated, obviously, from all the charges related to bombing the temple, since she didn't do that, what would she face? Assuming again, U.S. military, a similar thing happened. What would one face simply for what she did, where she was, fighting clone troopers, running away from clone troopers, ignoring Anakin, or ignoring someone's request, ignoring someone's order to turn herself in? Like, what would that in and of itself look like, even after someone had been exonerated, but maybe they were on the run?
A serious rap sheet in and of itself. Whether it's like fleeing and evading arrest is certainly a serious offense. Disobeying orders is an offense unique to the military. I mean, if one of you, like your teacher or your boss or something, said do this and you don't do it, you might get a bad grade, you might get fired or yelled at, but you're not going to get prosecuted.
It's not the same thing.
Not the same in the military. And it's all built on the fundamental principle that if soldiers aren't required to follow orders of superiors, there is no system. There is no good order and discipline. Like, the whole thing breaks down. And you can imagine what life would be like on the battlefield if that weren't in place. So that's sort of the backbone of the military specific offenses, meaning that criminal offenses that are unique to the military, and the punishment for that, the maximum punishment, is pretty serious. I mean, it's all tied to each case stands on its own 2 feet, but in this context, she's potentially obstructing justice by running, by failing to obey orders. She's putting those clone troopers at risk, and causing the government to expend a tremendous amount of resources as they hunt her down. It's a really very serious thing. Now, she did it for internally the right reasons, but being innocent of a crime and knowing in your heart of hearts you didn't do it doesn't entitle you to do all those things. Again, makes for a great episode. I'm glad she ran, because it's like awesome. Watching them hunt her down, and I think what is it? Is it Fox that finally catches her? I don't know. I'm a big clone trooper nerd, so any scene involving that sort of thing is awesome to me. But I mean, like that's all really serious. So the military could still, or the Jedi Order in this case, could still say, got it, you're innocent, and they could still prosecute her. They could still put her out of the order, just like the military could put you out for doing those things. And it has nothing to do with whether you were right or wrong in terms of your intent. I think the bigger picture here, that she was falsely accused of a really horrendous act, probably plays to her favor. I mean, if she's in front of a jury, she's a pretty sympathetic defendant. She's young. She's got a stellar combat record. I think about some of my clients that I've had the privilege of defending, who were combat veterans. I mean, I had a one of my clients that had been wrongfully accused of some stuff, was a 2-time Purple Heart recipient. Had gotten 2 Purple Hearts within 2 weeks of each other. Was like barely recovered from one injury. Volunteers to get back on a 50 cal on a Humvee for a convoy that was important, and gets blown up again, gets seriously injured again, and that ended his time on that deployment. But that defendant and his background, I mean, that was a powerful motive. That was a powerful factor for us. I mean, he just sat there, and the Jedi don't wear uniforms with decorations, but my guy sat there, and you can literally look at his medals, and he's got not 1 but 2 Purple Hearts on there, and like Ahsoka's got that kind of stature in terms of what she's done for the Republic, even at a young age. So if I'm a military, or if I'm a Jedi prosecutor, I'm thinking long and hard about whether it makes any sense to do something serious in terms of how to handle the case, and that's always sort of a behind the scenes thing, like how is this case worth prosecuting? Does it make sense to do this? This is Anakin Skywalker's Padawan. She's been falsely accused of a really bad act that was actually done by a much bigger fish in Barrisofi. Does it really make sense to spend our time going after her when she was just trying to defend herself? So the answer might be they don't do anything to her.
Do you think then, if something similar happened, so you think then that Ahsoka might not then face too harsh consequences, if any, then given the circumstances for what she did? If something similar happened in the military, if someone was falsely accused, they were acquitted, but they still caused a ruckus, disobeyed orders, resisted arrest, would they ever serve again, or do you think they'd be out of the military?
I think she's got a good shot. I mean, I would be hard pressed. I would press hard as her attorney to try to get in the Jedi Council's ear to say, look, look at what she's done for the Order. Look at the future that she has ahead of her. What lesson does this send to other Jedi, to other Padawans, to the Republic as a whole, if you still bring the hammer down on her? Like, you can make an example in different ways. These lessons can be taught. Heck, I'm sure that Ahsoka would probably be the first to say, you know what, like, this could have been handled differently maybe, but let's learn from this. I don't know. There's a real world case, not one involving a false somebody being falsely accused of everything. There was a very famous POW case in Afghanistan. The only service member who had remained captured, Bo Bergdahl was his name. He gets released in 2015 as part of a prisoner swap deal, and he was immediately investigated and accused of walking off of his base in Afghanistan and joining the Taliban. So he, very serious accusations that he joins the Taliban. He's providing them intelligence and helping out on things. That U.S. service members were killed trying to find him because he voluntarily walks off and joins the enemy. Just some really egregious things. His side is that he was trying to walk to another base to file a formal complaint because the leadership and the atmosphere at his very small outpost was so toxic that it was, he was being threatened effectively, and that he immediately got captured by the Taliban. He didn't join them, and he suffered horrendous torture at their hands. And there was a lot of evidence to back up the fact that he never helped them out. He suffered pretty horribly in captivity at the hands of the Taliban. And so the military prosecuted him. They went forward with a trial, and he was found guilty of walking off the base, but there were a lot of those same sort of factors that were at play, that would be at play with Ahsoka. Just that, in his case, a lot of really tear-jerking, information and evidence about how he was mistreated by the Taliban and what the physical and emotional abuse he endured and torture. And he got off. He still got punished, but not anything. He didn't get convicted of anything concerning joining the Taliban or fighting for them. Nothing like that. But arguably, he got off with a pretty minor punishment, all told. And I think you would see the same thing with Ahsoka. And my point, if I'm a Jedi in on the decision making, I say, what the juice isn't worth the squeeze on this. You're going to go through this massive muscle movement, this investigation, the trial, all of this, and any Jedi with their head screwed on straight is going to be like, what are we doing here? No, she's not going to get any serious punishment, and the Order is going to have a black eye on the back end, and she's going to walk off probably even more disillusioned than she already is. So yeah, I would be arguing hard to just let's find a calmer way to deal with this.
Yeah. Well, that is very interesting. That is definitely not what I was expecting to hear. So thank you for that.
I used to be a prosecution hack. Now I'm.
That is definitely
like
not
force.
what
I'm in balance.
That's definitely not what my preconceptions about the military would have led me to believe something like that would have been handled. So that is very, very interesting. Eli, you have another.
Yeah,
we have one
absolutely,
last,
I do. My final question pertaining to this arc, specifically from a legal perspective, is so the arc, of course, went down like it did. Specifically, that episode, The Wrong Jedi, went down like it did. If you were to write a similar kind of episode for this, what legal actions were not taken? What legal formalities were not done that you would have been interested in seeing for this trial?
I would love to see her get assigned. I would love to see like Jedi Jag. That sounds probably real dumb to most people, but real cool to me. Like a Jedi who's kind of specialized in legal affairs, right? We see Jedi do like all they have medical specialists. They have folks like Joe Costanu that specialize in like research and archiving and that sort of thing. They have to have Jedi that specialize in legal matters. I think like a good analogy is the Catholic Church. When priests internally are accused of certain things, they have an entire religious code called canon law, and there are canon lawyers. These are priests that are trained in canon law. They're not licensed attorneys who go out and practice law in your local courthouse, but they can represent priests and advise priests in sort of Catholic like religious internal matters. I would love to see something like that for the Jedi, like a Jedi that comes in and consults her. Like I'm envisioning like Tara Sinube, that old Jedi with the cane lightsaber, like somebody like that, like real crusty, like but like an experience. Like he hadn't done many lightsaber fights lately, but he has like been a gunslinger in the Jedi courtroom. Somebody like that to come in and really work the case with her, sort of like a true legal drama. Where he believes in her, or she for that matter, if it's a female representing, and you see it from their internal perspective, fighting the system like that. So that'd be how I'd write it. I would take a Star Wars legal drama like that in a heartbeat, but Lucasfilm doesn't return my calls. So
that would be very interesting to see.
Yeah, I'm pulling back into the dark recesses of my Star Wars brain from one of the maybe 4 or 5 Legends novels I've read. There's a lawyer who's not a Jedi specifically, but does work for the Jedi. I'm not sure if either of you have heard. Probably you have, Jacob, because I know I gave you this book. From the Fate of the Jedi series, Nawari Ven.
Oh, yeah.
Who was a lawyer who worked for the Jedi, and yeah, thank you so much. I was like, I think that's his name, who worked for the Jedi and who was seemingly defending them in matters, again, like in canon, that they could not win. Man, I just realized the Jedi, Jacob, I think the Jedi just need a full overhaul. Jacob's been pushing for the Jedi to get a better PR team for a few months now in the galaxy. The Jedi need a better legal team as well, apparently. They just need a better everything, honestly. The Jedi just need... The Jedi, it shouldn't have been a surprise to anybody that they crumbled. Now, I want to get out of the legal analysis for a second, and I want to ask, What is your, as a fan, as a huge Star Wars fan, what's your opinion of this arc? What do you like about this arc? What do you dislike about this arc? How do you feel about this arc?
This is one of my favorite of all the entire Clone Wars. If I were to show somebody or try to point them in the direction of a couple episodes to give you a feel for the Clone Wars, this would be among my first episodes. Obviously, you don't get the sort of classic like war action, but you do get the chase, which is great. But it shows so much about why the series and why these characters are so amazing in it. It happened at a time in the series when they had found their stride and were just like, I'm thinking about the other arcs in that season, and it's just like hit after hit after hit. And I believe this was the final 3 episodes of the season. So it ended that way. You're like seeing Ahsoka walk off and Anakin stand there, and I'm hearing the music in my head right now. I'm like trying not to cry a little bit, but yeah,
So are we all.
It's such a payoff moment, but not a payoff in the way that you think it's going to be for however long you've been watching the show. So it's one of those that just speaks to sort of Filoni and the rest of the creative team's plan for the series and for Ahsoka in particular.
Absolutely. In the episode, we'll get into a lot more of our thoughts on this. But yeah, I adore this arc as well. I think Jacob's probably the bigger fan than me, but that's not like saying I hate it or anything. I love it. I think this is like one of your favorite arcs, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Oh yeah, I definitely am a big fan of this arc. As hard as it is to rewatch, it's one of those moments where you know what's going to happen, but you're like, no, let it be different this time, please. Don't make me watch this again.
It's definitely an experience to watch. Should we get to our interview questions?
Yeah, let's get to some little lighter questions. Thank you so much for your insight. I definitely
absolutely.
I definitely learned a lot. So thank you.
Absolutely, we really valued your insight in a lot of the ways with this system and analyzing this episode from perhaps a different standpoint that we've ever done on In a Galaxy before. But let's get to some fun Star Wars questions we have. This is totally not pressure free. You're going to be under so much pressure.
I'm more worried about this than anything analyzing Ahsoka's trial.
I'm joking. No, only the last question means anything to anyone, and even if it means anything to anyone, it's going to mean something to 3 people: me, Jacob, and Devore from A Larger View of the Force. If you don't take his side, then I think he might be a little annoyed, but that's fine. He can deal with it. He's had dozens of people before not take his side, so he can deal.
Thomas, what is your favorite Star Wars trilogy?
I have a strong pull to the OT just because that's where it all started for me. In fact, I have like the first VHS box set that finally got me off the bootleg copies sitting to my left. But I have to say, at a time when I thought I would not get any new Star Wars, and at a particular point in my life that was really tough. Like I got like mercilessly bullied as a kid, in particular because I like Star Wars. It just middle school and high school, the first little bit of probably the first 2 years of high school before I met some close friends that I still have now were sucky, to say the least. Probably an understatement. But the prequel trilogy kind of hit at that time, and that was Star Wars had always been sort of a refuge for me, but the prequel trilogy in particular, being able to go to the theater, to look forward to new content, to like get the Star Wars Insider magazine and like see like, shots of new Star Wars being made, that was like a real safe harbor for me at a really tough point in my life. And so I get particularly defensive about the prequels and how I feel about them because of that. And I owe a lot to those movies. And so I think I'll always have just about as strong a connection as I do to the OT with those because of it.
All right.
I just heard all of the prequel fans out there going, I love the Republic. I love democracy. I love the Republic. Anytime anything goes their way, just automatic.
That's right. I have to say, who's your favorite Star Wars character? If you can pick just one.
It's got to be Darth Vader as he sits behind me, choking poor Captain Antilles that the audio listeners can't see. No, Vader. I spoke about that moment where he first comes on Leia's ship in A New Hope. Just the epitome of badass. Like, just he like doesn't give two F's about anything except for finding Skywalker. And I've really enjoyed in particular the new canon content with him, like the Charles Soule sort of mini 25 issues of a comics, not mini, but like the Soule Vader stuff has been phenomenal. I would like drink Rogue One if they blended it up and put it into a bottle in that last scene in particular. In fact, Kate Mulligan, for those that follow the Schmoedown out there, General Mulligan, just watched Rogue One for the first time not too long ago, and she texted me. Wow. She had never seen it. She was watching it to help prep me for some studying, and she texted me and she was like, "What?" All caps, like, "Why did you never tell me about the Vader scene?" I was like, "How do you not know about the Vader scene?" Like, everybody, you could be like living in Timbuktu and know about the Vader scene in Rogue One. So, yeah, I've always had just like a real strong just love of that character, as evil as he is before his redemption.
Yeah. I mean, I want to add on a quick point that I think is pretty cool. Eli, actually, we watched Rogue One in the theaters when it came out together, and I actually remember sitting next to Eli, and during the Vader scene, I just remember, I remember you just saying yes under your breath.
Yes. Little spoiler about that movie for me. I'm not the biggest fan of Rogue One. I like it, it's great, but it's not one of my favorites. But then that scene came on, and I'm like, what movie am I watching? Oh my god, this is crazy. Oh my god. Oh, wow. I didn't know what to think. And it was a nuts experience. Speaking of the Star Wars movies, what is your Star Wars movie ranking? If you don't have a specific ranking, you can tell us a top 5 or just your favorite or something like that. But,
yeah,
it's a Star Wars fan's favorite pastime, so...
Oh yeah, I don't rank. What I do is I would categorize it in terms of if I've got 15 or 20 minutes to just sit down and watch, or like pop out my phone and watch, what am I more likely to put on like a chunk of? And it shifts all the time. It shifted during the Schmoedown and my experience watching these movies here, so it's always fluid with me, but pretty persistently my top 5 would probably include Return of the Jedi, The Last Jedi, Revenge of the Sith, and Phantom Menace are like they jockey with each other because I love them both very dearly for different reasons. So we'll count that as one because they at any point could be switched. I'll put Rogue One in there, and then from the sequel trilogy, I already had Last Jedi. Let's see here. I like Solo. A lot of people don't like Solo. I think Solo is like a fun, like popcorn Star Wars movie, and like you give me 15 minutes, and I'll watch the train heist scene and be a happy clam. Like I'd be perfectly fine with that. But there are people like rankings imply that you like things less than others, and I just that's just not the case with me. Like, you can call me a shill or whatever, but I'm perfectly fine with folks that genuinely don't like things within the Star Wars universe. That's just not me.
Yeah. I totally agree with you there. Like, look, I think full disclosure, I do have a ranking. Attack of the Clones is my 12th favorite Star Wars movie. It's fair. Not my least favorite. It's my 12th favorite. I like things about it. That last 30 minutes is incredible. It's like it's one of the best sequences in the prequel trilogy. There are other things I'm not huge fans of, but yeah, I do like that idea of like trying to find the good in everything, and I appreciate that sort of analysis of it. I think, Jacob, you got your next one.
Yeah. In terms of Star Wars media, Star Wars projects of any type, books, comics, TV shows, what is your favorite piece of Star Wars that is not a movie that you think people are overlooking or missing out on?
Man, I think the comics don't get enough love. I say with full disclosure, I am way behind. Usually on a normal year, a non-Schmoedown year, when I'm like actively prepping for Dragon Con, I consume every piece of Star Wars media that's out there. That's gotten increasingly difficult. I have 2 kids that are like 3 and younger, so that's, like, you can imagine, that's like the tiny nugget of free time that I have. But the comics are something. There's so many just like insulated short runs of stories that are so good, that enhance the characters that they're about, that I would point people towards. Where, if somebody says, I'm really intimidated by the 50 books that are out there that have come out since 2015, I'd say, well, how would you do with like 25 issues of a comic that you can read in probably a week, if you're reading a couple issues a day? That's a little bit easier to bite off. And so whether it's like the Lando miniseries, like the 5-issue run that they did telling his story, or I really enjoyed, there's like a one-off Cassian and K2 issue that explained how they met. The Vader series that I've mentioned, individual arcs. The main Star Wars comic is like probably close to issue 100 now, but they've had individual stories told within it, and they've just been really, really good. Not all of them have been stuff that I would like point people towards or read again, but some of it's just so good, and there's like such connective tissue to some of the bigger stories. Like I read the Vader series, and then I go back and watch Empire or New Hope, Empire, and Jedi in a completely different light. And that's, to me, that's the measure of a good Star Wars story. If it's within the existing universe and it causes me to go consume media in a different way or look at it in a different light, that's a good story in my book. And there are a lot of those in the comics.
Yeah. I would second that.
Oh, go ahead.
Get involved with a good comic run. I'm currently this is actually tying into the next question we're gonna ask you. So I have a little bit of an obsession. Jacob may or may not know this. I have a little bit of an obsession with Ochi of Festoon. So
you're saying that I definitely know too much about this.
Yes. And so when I found out he was being added to Greg Pak's Vader comic, I'm like, okay, I'm jumping on board this train. And I'm like, oh, Ochi will be gone within an arc, but I'm enjoying this so much that I'm going to keep going with this. And then they kept doing Ochi. I'm like, okay, this is getting real now. But the Darth Vader comic right now, I think it's picking up a good run, and I absolutely would recommend to anybody, picking up, whether it's a High Republic related comic or a, anything from, Lando that you mentioned to Rise of Kylo Ren, pulling through my head. Speaking of unnecessarily short-lived characters, I think a lot of people in Star Wars have their background characters that they really love. What's your favorite Star Wars background character?
He shouldn't be a background character, but I love Dutch, John Vander. He got a little bit of love in Star Wars Rebels. He was in a handful of episodes there, but any pilot who has the gumption to hop into a Y-wing and have that sort of like vision and clarity for what the best starfighter model is not just a hero, but a genius in my mind. So Dutch is great. I love his line in the briefing room where he's like, what good are snub fighters against that? Like, come on, man. Like, you're the squadron leader. Don't be saying something like that in front of all your guys. Like,
yeah,
you should be like, heck yeah, let's go get this thing. We're like,
yeah. What is your favorite alien species in Star Wars? Favorite alien race? Or just the coolest?
That's a great question. I always thought, I'm a big Cad Bane fan, and I always thought Duros were just a cool look. It was like a Star Wars version of your typical, at the time, when A New Hope came out, your typical alien creature. Like, no other aliens looked like anything that anybody had seen before, except if you paused on the cantina scene and look back and you see the 2 Duros that are talking to each other. They kind of look like the big-headed, like little-eyed aliens that have existed in pop culture for forever. But man, Cad Bane really sent it home. Like Duros had just sort of been like background characters across the board, and then Cad Bane comes along, and I'm like, where can I get a Duros costume? Like this would be really cool to like cosplay as Cad Bane, because he's just like such a cool cat, and somebody that like where other people have redeeming qualities, or maybe they find some good in the universe and they attach to that and they say, maybe I can be a better person. Cad Bane doesn't care about any of that. He just cares about cash and getting jobs done, getting his notoriety and his rep up. And so I have to appreciate that. So if Duros can provide a character like Cad Bane, they get a top ranking in my book.
Absolutely, and we see that more of that in the recent Bad Batch.
Yes.
And I don't know about you, I was like, because I'm not a huge Cad Bane fan, and I'm like, when Cad Bane dropped on that episode, what was that, Reunion, I just sat there, and I was like, they're doing this in the first season?
Right.
Whoa, Clone Wars, we haven't seen this guy in 8 years.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. What is your favorite Star Wars planet?
I have to say, let's see here. I'm trying to think of the planet that Reclam Station is on. It's just a gas giant, and this is where my trivia brain
I think
creaks.
Wien Kathu, perhaps.
I just looked it up. Yarma.
Yarma, thank you.
Yeah.
So this is showing my I skipped Dragon Con for a year and I can't pull Yarma. There's nothing valuable on Yarma. It looks like just like one big fart cloud, but it does have the facility that gave the rebellion its first batch of Y-wings. So Reclam Station, and I guess by extension Yarma, will always hold a special place in my heart. Honestly, I was always a big fleet junkie. The Starfighters have always been like an extension of that. So we haven't seen. I'm trying to think if we saw it in Battlefront, Kuat, and by extension Kuat drive yards, where a lot of the Star Destroyers are made. That was my favorite planet growing up, that I like never saw on screen, but like desperately wanted to see Star Destroyers getting made. Little did I know that if I just flash forward and waited a few years, you'd get to see that at least on Corellia in Solo. But
yeah. By the way, this is so random. I love how you randomly pluck the one Rebels quote that's constantly in my mind. I don't know why, but anytime I show somebody something, in my mind is always circulating, I give to you Reclam Station.
Yeah.
It's one of those lines. Hondo, man. Jacob's been harping on me for a while about like, oh, Hondo's great, man.
Hondo
and
is
I'm
awesome.
like, Hondo gets you somewhere. Sometimes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, if you lived in the Star Wars universe, what would you want your job to be?
I would. This is gonna sound like seedy. I would have like a crummy little like law office at Mos Eisley, and I would cater my law practice to whoever, scum and villainy, upstanding citizens like Cobb Vanth. You got a legal problem, that's fine. You need to draw up a quick contract so you can transport an old man, a farm boy, 2 droids, and have no questions asked. I'm your guy. You get a DUI on your old creaky speeder. I'm your guy. Whatever the trouble you've run into is sort of like one of these. You watch an old Western and there's like the storefront. You get your bank, your sheriff's office. The grizzled old attorney that somehow chose to go out to North Dakota and practice law in the Badlands. I think that'd be fun. I say fun, and then I'd be there and be like, "What the heck was I thinking?"
But you're just taking you're taking all comers. If they can pay, it doesn't matter.
That's right. Yeah, I'm not asking where the credits came from.
Yeah, I would say Tatooine is probably the best place to do one of these things because, as we've seen multiple times in Star Wars, everything happens on Tatooine.
Yeah. Have you been injured in a dewback accident?
Yeah.
You may be entitled to compensation.
Have a billboard up.
Have Jabba the Hutt's goons taken out a little too much action on you? You know where to go. Okay. Well, I'm sure you know the famous behind-the-scenes quote from George Lucas that some people quote too often. It's like poetry. They rhyme. Every stanza, so the rhymes to last. Hopefully, it'll work. What is your favorite example of this in Star Wars? There are so many. It does not have to be from the movies.
That's a really great question. In particular, I think Ezra's journey has a lot of probably very intentional echoes to Luke's, although from a different angle, and by extension, Kanan's journey into sort of re-embracing his role as a Jedi. I think Kanan is like a sort of a shadow of Obi-Wan in different ways. Obi-Wan, unfortunately found his way unintentionally out of the Jedi Order in sort of similar circumstances to Kanan's. Kanan had to experience it as a kid, watching his master get gunned down, while Obi-Wan had to watch his best friend and his apprentice turn to the dark side before his very eyes. And then Obi-Wan, leapt back into action, had no problem kind of answering the call again after doing his duty to look over Luke. It was a lot harder for Kanan to come back full circle. And so you see a version of that. And once he does, he realizes, much like Obi-Wan did with Anakin, that being a master is not always the easiest thing. Imparting those lessons that in many cases you never learned fully, and being looked to and relied upon as a leader is not easy in any situation. They experience that arc in very different ways.
Nice. Yeah.
If you're talking to Rebels, that's all him. Look, I'm a huge fan of Rebels, but Jacob is a huge fan of Rebels.
So good.
You have your original trilogy kids, your prequel trilogy kids. I'm a Rebels kid. That was the first part of Star Wars. I was old enough. I was watching it as it came out. I just
That's
had
awesome.
such love for that show, and I will defend Rebels no matter what.
I will be in the trenches right with you.
Oh, thank you. I can't say enough good things about Rebels. It's such a heartwarming show. Okay.
I do tend to invite a lot of guests on here who like Rebels to the amount that you do, Jacob. I'm just realizing this.
I know, it's great. I'm very lucky. So second to last question. This is kind of a fun one that I like to fantasize about sometimes. If you could take one technological item or one force power from Star Wars into the real world and use it whenever you want, what would it be and why?
That's a really good question as well. I think it'd be awesome to have repulsor lift technology. It's used in such a variety of ways. I mean, the land speeders immediately come to mind. I think about like how much cooler I would have been in high school if I had like a land speeder. Like it could be beat up as my first car was. But if it was floating and you just rolled up and you're like, sup. Yeah, I'd at least have been I'd have been marginally cooler. I don't know that my life would have turned out any differently, but I would have felt cooler internally than my like beat up old Mazda that I drove around. But yeah, so probably repulsive, but like that technology has so many different uses. I feel like whether it's the ability to have like something like a low altitude assault transport, the LAT gunships, or really anything else. It's such a versatile technology that you could have some cool stuff with it.
Absolutely. Okay, so you know who this character is because I know you've watched this movie like all the other 11 Star Wars movies. Probably 10 fazillion times as post as in The Rise of Skywalker. I think I did that right. But anyway, she's one of our favorites. We've gone through this with many guests on In a Galaxy. Look, it wasn't her fault that they used a decoy. She hit the ship. And I want you to give me your pronunciation of her name. I'm sharing the screen right now. Who is this?
Zam Wessel.
Cool. Great. Devore, that's like our 11th one on the list. When are you finally going to accept the reality that is the situation?
How does he pronounce it?
Wessel.
See, that's where he's not fluent in Zolan, and that the Claudite language. That's it's understandable. It's understandable. Not everybody can pronounce Claudite names with precision, but
you
I'm
heard
sure
it here
she
first.
would correct you.
Yeah. Well, actually, she might even correct herself because we did a episode on the Legends video game Bounty Hunter, and she does pronounce it in the game Zam Wessel.
We call that a continuity error that was never caught.
Especially because on the official Wikipedia page, it says, do whatever, either one can go.
Yeah, tomato, tomato.
But
dead either way.
No, not Zam. She's become like, I gotta say, I'm not sure, Jacob, if you're like this, but like she's become like my second favorite background character now, just because of how much we've talked about her on this show. But yeah, I think that's it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Star Wars in the Galaxy, watching all the Star Wars that we can get our hands on. Thomas, do you want to plug all of your stuff?
Sure, yeah. You can find me on Twitter at the most creative name on that platform, at Thomas L. Harper. That's L as in Lee. And you can find me normally screaming about Y-Wings or something trivia related. I don't know. I still podcast for the Legal Geeks. We typically will bring Star Wars stuff online as new film content comes out. So we'll have a special series for Book of Boba Fett at the end of December. We'll do like a weekly episode where we cover each episode and the legal issues in it. We've done look at the legal issues in like the Bad Batch and both seasons of The Mandalorian. It's always a lot of fun. And then I'm also on the Joint Geeks of Staff, which is a national security and sci-fi podcast where I'm one of the co-hosts, probably the least qualified co-host on there. It's like a State Department Foreign Service officer, an F-15 weapons system officer with like 3,000 hours of flight time, like a bunch of which is combat flight time. Let's see here, a PhD, 2 PhD candidates. So a lot of big brains that are really, really smart about stuff, smarter than I am, but we're all big nerds, and we talk about the issues that straddle the line, sort of like here, between sci-fi and national security. So this past week we explored censuses in sci-fi, and like it sounds boring, but actually got into a talk about like why, if Palpatine had used a census, he might have been able to better manipulate the galaxy to his whims. And we'll have a special episode covering Dune coming up, the new film. So yeah, you can find that at the Joint Geeks, and the Legal Geeks is at the Legal Geeks on Twitter, and both are on iTunes. So yeah, thanks so much for having me. This has been a blast. Like I get to nerd out about Star Wars and get to talk a little law. Like my dream come true.
Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely, this has been a blast for us as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on once again. Yeah, I learned so much from all the knowledge that you've had to share.
Good.
So thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day with I know with your young children. You probably
now they're asleep right now, so
okay.
This is my time.
All right, this is your time. Well, that is delightful to hear.
This is great. Thank you so much for coming on again. You can find us in the Galaxy at In a Galaxy Pod on Twitter, at Star Wars In a Galaxy Pod on Instagram. You can find our show at Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you listen to your podcast. We will probably be there. You can email us at slunagalaxy@gmail.com. Please leave a 5-star review and rating if you can. It really helps our visibility. And I think until next time, may the Force be with you. Always.